My name's James. I've got over 40 years experience as a separation scientist. I started working in the agrochemical industry in the late 70s. During the early 2000s, I joined Pfizer as an analytical chemist, and I joined ACDLabs as an application scientist in October 2019. Today's presentation is titled, How a Method is More Than a Separation. I pulled this presentation together not to be a training session on how to develop a method, because there's not enough time in the 40 minutes we've got allocated to do that. But I pulled it together to be thought-provoking, for people to understand that there are a lot of elements that go into converting a separation into a method. Now, over the years, I've had many conversations with chemists and formulators, either in a corridor or in the lab or in an office, and they ask the question, I've got some impurities in a mixture and I need separating. My screening methods are just not doing the job. And I always answer, yeah, I can do that for you. It's a fairly quick job. It'll probably be done by the end of the day, maybe tomorrow. And they're always very pleased because that enables them to get on with their work. What I have found though, is once you hand over the results, the chromatogram, the conditions that you've used, there's generally a question that comes back, yeah, thanks for that, but I am missing some more peaks. There's some other impurities that I'd like to find. I just can't see them under the conditions that I'm using. You do learn a lesson, and it's a lesson well worth learning. You've come full circle. You've got the separating conditions, you've given them results, but they want you to go around that circle again. So if you reflect on what you've done, you probably haven't got all the details that you need to be able to do a proper job, to complete the task once and for all. That's not to say that you won't need to adapt separations further down the line, but you need to see the end of this piece of work. So what do? You know, the purpose of chromatography isn't just about separating compounds. It's about understanding the purpose of that separation before you begin any work. So what do you need to do? What questions do you need to ask before you start that experimental work? Do you understand the problem? Do you really understand what that chemist or formulator is asking you? Have you asked the correct questions? A lot of the time, I've got into difficulty with developing a separation because they've been ad hoc conversations in corridors, in laboratories, as you're passing someone's office. So you need to have all the facts before you can make any meaningful progression and designing the experiment. And have the customers ask you the correct question. Now, you're doing a job for a customer. The customer needs to understand exactly what it is they're after. And they may not have all the facts. The person that's asked you to do the job may be one person out of a team of 10, 20, 30. And all those individuals all have pieces of the information, but probably none of them have the overall picture. You need to think about what approach you're going to take. Am I going to start from scratch? Do I have any structural knowledge? You should have. The chemist will have. They may not be the structures of the 2 compounds or 3 compounds that you want to separate, but they will have a structure for the parent. So you're going to have to base all your knowledge on that one structure. So you might want to do reverse phase HPLC, maybe volatile, you could do GC. And once you've done the work, you need to think about how you're going to report the results. It's no good having the results on your computer when no one else can get to them. You need to think about, are you going to write a report, an email, and what results are you going to report? Do they just want a chromatogram? Do they want the separation conditions? Do they want to run the chromatography in their labs? And once you've reported the results, what's going to happen to them? Are they going to go into a filing? Are the conditions that you've developed, are they going to be used long-term, short-term? Are they going to be transferred to other labs? Is it fit for purpose? Well, it's only fit for purpose if you know what the purpose of the separation is. It could be for GMP, it could be GLP, it could be for development work, or it could be just nice to know. Someone wants to know where these peaks are. Can you find them for me? Oh yes, they're there. No more work. So is this a long-term project, or is just doing the separation, is that the end of it? What they're going to do with the results? It's all very well being asked to do a job, but you need to know what the ultimate goal is. So if all they want to do is separate two peaks because they want to scale up for prep chromatography to isolate those 2 or 3 or 4 compounds to do additional work on them, they may want them for reference standards. It may be that those 2 peaks have only ever been seen in that particular variation of a synthetic route. If you know what the outcome is going to be, then you can start the work. It's no good starting work that doesn't have an outcome. It's not finalised. So if you've answered no or I'm not sure to any of those questions, then you need to stop any work that you're doing. You could end up wasting an awful lot of time, your time and other people's time, because you don't have a good understanding of what you need to do. So the ultimate goal of the separation, what is it? What do you need to do? So is it just for prep scale up? So to get some conditions that you can give to the prep chromatographers so they can isolate the compounds of interest? Do you need a quantitative method? Will this method go to a QC lab? Will it go to production? Will it go to QA? Will it be transferred out? Will it go to contract houses who are running stability studies for you? Are we going to be doing area normalisation? Are we going to be doing percent weight? Do we have pure standards to do percent weight? They're all things that you need to consider. Is it for investigative purposes? So why are the impurities missing? Have they been formed in that synthetic route? Are they co-eluting? Are there any more impurities? Well, as the project progresses, there probably are. Will that separation be suitable for those? You don't know. It's something that you need to think about, but not something you can react to until that scenario comes to pass. Do you have the correct sample? So by that I mean, have you got a sample that's got all the impurities that you need to separate in? It's much easier to work with one sample than with multiple samples. So can you combine samples so you're running with one sample? So we need to consider what experimental work you need for a chromatographic separation. So you need to make sure that you've got structure detail. So you know what the API structure is. You know what the starting material structures are and intermediates. And using that data, you can calculate physical properties. So you can calculate theoretical pKa, log D, log P, and solubility data. Looking at the structure, you can select the chromatographic mode. So you need to look at the technique. You need to make sure that you've got the equipment. Have you got the equipment set up to do screening experiments? So do you have a system that's got various columns, solvents, buffers? All those factors, are they enough to give you a separation? Well, it's the bare minimum. There's a whole host of other things that feed into that. But more importantly, is this an analytical method? Have you done enough to be able to transfer that method to be able to validate it? Well, no. There's an awful lot of other work that feeds into that separation to make it a method. So what the chemist is actually asking the analyst is for a method, not a separation. So how do you take those basic separation parameters and convert that into an analytical method? Well, on top of everything that we've been through, you need to decide whether you're using HPLC or UPLC. You need to select the detector, and it may be that you want to use multiple detectors. So diode array, mass spec, refractive index, fluorescent, CAD, ELSD, or even electrochemical detectors. Early stage, you really need to cover all bases, because there may be process-related impurities, degradants that don't have chromophores. They may not be ionizable, so you won't pick them up in a mass spec. So you need to give yourself every opportunity of detecting these peaks. What mode of chromatography are you going to use? Reverse phase, normal phase, SFC, Hillick, capillary electrophoresis? You need to select your stationary phase. You're going to use C18, C8. What column dimensions? You could develop a method on UPLC, and the method could be transferred to a lab that have got HPLC. So it wouldn't be any good selecting a UPLC column. Small particle size, small internal diameter. You need to select HPLC. What's your mobile phase composition? What does that consist of? Do you know what solvent you're using? You're going to be using acetonitrile, methanol, propanol. even THF. Are you using single solvent or are you using mixed solvent? You're using acetonitrile, methanol mixed. You need to select your buffer. What buffer are you using? Using the pKa log D values. You can select the pH for starting the method development. What buffer strength? Are you going to use 5, 10, 15, 20 millimolar? Do you need an ion pair reagent? Are you trying to separate polar compounds that you need an ion pair reagent? What flow rate are you going to use? Is flow rate important in optimizing that method? Am I going to run gradient or isocratic? Gradient is great, but isocratic methods are much easier to transfer. You need a well-characterized system, and the receiving lab needs a well-characterized system to transfer a gradient separation effectively. What's the gradient profile? Where do you start? Sample selection. Have you got the samples? What samples do I use? Well, you can use development samples, provided they've got the impurities that you need to separate. You can use false degradation samples, isolated impurities, mother liquors, which are rich in PRIs. What diluent do I use? Do I know the solubility? Well, you can get a rough idea what the solubility is from in silico solubility predictions. What extraction technique am I going to use if I'm looking to develop a separation and a method for drug product? So with all those details, you need to optimize the gradient, temperature, solvent, and pH. And going through all the items on the slide, I think you can see that there's a vast amount of experimental work that needs to take place. There's a lot to coordinate, as there may be multiple analysts doing that work, and you need to keep a plan in mind. One way of doing that is by having a workflow. You can combine lots of experiments, in this case column, buffer and solvent screen. At the end of that assessment, you can choose a column, a buffer, and what solvent you want to use. You can run them individually, so you could do a column screen, then you could do a buffer screen, then you could do a solvent screen. Much more efficient to combine them though. It may be at the end of that assessment that there are 1, 2, maybe 3 columns, buffers and solvents and solvent mixtures that look promising. You could select one, or you could select all 3 and do a gradient optimization and temperature series of experiments. When you start doing the assessment on the column, you need to have set a specification up front. And what I mean by specification is you need to know what your minimum tolerance for resolution is. So resolution between main band and its nearest eluting degradant or PRI, and the minimum resolution acceptable between PRIs and degradants. You also need to know what the acceptable limit for peak tailing, peak fronting, and also while you're doing the screening, you can preempt validation. You can run limit of quantification samples, so you know that you're detecting peaks at low levels. So if you meet that specification, then you know that it's okay to take that column, that buffer, that pH through to optimization. It may be that they all meet it, and the resolution between 2 columns or between 2 conditions, instead of being 2 on one, it could be 1.8 or 1.5 on another, which may meet your internal specification, but you want to optimize, you want to get the best resolution possible. So it may be that you just look at the column where the critical pair that you need to separate, you've got a resolution of 2.5. So once you've done the optimization, you need to think about a risk assessment. So what parts of that optimization could go wrong and affect the method long term? It could be ratio of solvent, it could be pH, it could be both of those. It could be column performance. They're all factors that need to be assessed, and they can be assessed during the robustness study. So when you're looking at the robustness study of the method, you take various parameters, you alter them. For example, you might be working at 254 nanometers and you might want to assess plus or minus 4 nanometers to see what that does to the sensitivity and to the LOQ solution. Can you still detect the peaks of interest at low level at 250 and at 258? It may be that flow rate is important, so you look at flow rate and you alter it from, 0.4 mils a minute to 0.3 and to 0.5. Does that affect resolution of the critical pairs? So it's important that a risk assessment's carried out and the robustness studies carried out, so you understand the edges of failure. So are the conditions that you've chosen from the optimization stage, are they in the right place? You need to do that, and you need to be in control of that process, because what you don't want to be doing is altering those conditions while you're trying to validate the method. So you need to do an assessment on the false degradation results. You need to make sure that you've captured and you're tracking all the relevant degradation peaks as well as PRIs. And to make sure that you're capturing those, you can do a mass balance calculation. So everything should add up to 100%. So if you can account for all those impurities, all those process-related impurities and degradants within that chromatogram, then you've done a good job. So you need to validate the method. So you need to look at the sample concentration, the injection volume. Am I injecting sufficient on the column that I can detect the low-level compounds that I'm trying to track? Have I selected the correct wavelength for all the impurities within that sample set? Once you've selected the wavelength, you can then determine the relative response factors. You can then determine solution stability. So is your analytical solution stable for a day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days? Or is it quite volatile and only stable for a couple of hours? Analysts need to know this if they're going to be using these methods long term. Is the method specific? Am I separating everything that I started out to separate? Is that separation stable? Will that separation change with time? Is the resolution on the critical pairs that I've determined, is that stable? During development, I've been getting a resolution of 2.5. Did I maintain that during the robustness study? Am I maintaining that during the validation study? Have I got linearity? Is this method going to be used for assay as well as purity? Do I have linearity across the whole range? Can I see low-level peaks? So can I see the reporting limit? What's the limit of detection? What method of quantification am I using? Am I going to be using area normalization, or am I going to be using percent weight? You can see that you're generating an awful lot of data, so you need to pull it all together. But you need to bear in mind that what was the purpose of doing this. So you always need to think about what started this method development program. You need to keep your plan in mind. Am I deviating from the plan? Have the parameters that I've selected, have they started to change? Do I need to reassess what I'm doing? And is the performance of the separation that I've developed, is that being maintained as I'm working through? So you're generating data all the time. Every time you run those separation conditions, you can look at peak shape. Is it deteriorating? Am I getting 100, 600, 1,000 injections out of a column? Is my mobile phase stable? Am I getting pH drift? Have I got a true buffer there, or just a pH adjusted solution? They're all things that you need to think about, and you need to pull all this data together. So is the organic chemist, is he happy? So have you spent a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks, generating all that data, validating a method? So they've got a method rather than just a simple separation. Well, if the chemist can go away and generate all the relevant data that they need to make sure that the project reaches fruition, then they've done their job, and you as an analyst have done yours. So is this an analytical method? Once you pull all those individual pieces together? Well, yes, it is. But it's only once you pull those pieces of information together do you have an analytical method. But what you've got to bear in mind, the projects are never set in stone. There may be changes that occur during the use of that method. Raw materials may change. Suppliers of raw materials may change. The synthetic route may change. Excipients used in formulations may change. And the formulation may change. Totally different formulation. There's a whole host of other changes that may occur as the project progresses. And if they do, you need to reassess. So you need to reassess whether your method will cope with those changes. It may be that there are new process-related impurities, may even be new degradants. How far do you take those changes? Do you just run samples on that method to make sure that the new impurities and degradants are separated? Or do you go back to square one and redevelop a whole new separation? They're things that need to be risk assessed. They need to be thought about, and they need to be thought about carefully, but they need to be documented. So you need to think about all the questions that we've asked previously. Bear those in mind, and any other questions that you think you should ask, or more importantly, your customer asks you. There's a whole host, as you've seen, of pieces of experimental work, questions that all pull together that give you the whole picture. So as you can see, that during that method development, separation development process, you generate a vast amount of data. That data's processed, it's assessed, it's accessed, and it's accessed multiple times by multiple people. The data's stored and restored again by multiple people. The data may need to be updated. You've got chromatograms labelled with unknown peaks. Once they've been identified, they may be significant. That data may need to be updated with names, even if it's just masses. Now, that data could be stored in multiple places. It could be stored on paper, be stuck in someone's desk. It could be stored on computer. It could be a database that multiple analysts and chemists have got access to. You need to ensure that all the people that require that data have got access to it. It's no good in the hands of just one person. So you need to know when a project asks you to do more than just separate a couple of peaks. An analytical method is so much more than just the separation, and it's not something that can be done overnight.